Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. We're continuing our lecture series on Asma'ullah al-Husna, the beautiful names or beauteous names or beautiful attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have covered the analytical material. How do we know that there are these names? How do we know the number of the names? How do we know what the names specifically are? And so forth. And again, I won't recap here. But now, finally, we, I think, want to get to what we've all been waiting for, which is the spiritual aspect of these names, because that, after all, is what it is really all about. How can these names and this notion of the beautiful names or attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enhance our spirituality, make us closer to the divine, improve our worship, enhance our dua, and so forth. And I do hope, inshallah, that you will find in this portion something that will help along those lines. Of course, we cannot cover all of the names. We will just take some samples, but hopefully, inshallah, this would be then a springboard for your own further study, because this really is a lifetime endeavor. It is not something that can be covered in a lecture series, but hopefully, inshallah, this would kind of ignite the fire to learn more and go more in depth. So the first thing we want to look at is, okay, we now know that there are these divine names or beautiful names. Why? What is their purpose? Why have we been told this? And I've heard three different theories that I would like to share with you. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. I would think that the truth is some combination of the three and more, but I certainly, just as an ordinary human being, have my own biases in favor of some and somewhat against others. And so I'll try to share with you my thinking, and hopefully, inshallah, as I said, that will be a springboard for your own thinking. So theory number one is that these are qualities for us to emulate. That if we want to be good servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we want to try to imitate some of His qualities. I myself, to be very honest with you, and again Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, have always had trouble with this particular theory. Number one, I feel that it is incompatible with the nature of the divine that we could emulate it at all. We may be able to trace a small glimpse, but of course, for us as humans to be able to emulate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in any substantive way, I think is somewhat antithetical really to our conception of the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when we of course look at something like Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim that we will cover in more depth later, we already know that while I can try to be Rahim, to be a merciful person, that I cannot be Rahman, because we know that that name is reserved entirely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I can describe a human being as Rahim, somebody who shows mercy, but I cannot describe them as Rahman. The Arabic language does not allow that, because that designation is reserved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that, to me, in and of itself, tells me that there is a very definite limit on us being able to emulate the qualities. Also, I think we actually run into some contradictions and incompatibilities, because among the names are Al-Qabid, the one who withholds. Then, of course, there's Al-Basit, the one who extends his hand in magnanimity. Then there's al-khafid, the one who reduces and abases and debases. And we can't say that we should be emulating that. Or al-qabid, withholding grace or withholding sustenance. We see al-mu'izz, the one who honors. I don't think we actually have the power to honor another human being. And then the pair that goes with that is al-mudhil, the dishonorer or the humiliator. And how can we say that we would want to emulate that? Then, of course, al-muhyi, the giver of life. We can't give life. We can't emulate that in the least. Al-mumit, the bringer of death. We should not be bringers of death. So to me, that theory that they are qualities to emulate, honestly, I have not been able to subscribe to, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. What I take away from it is that things which may be incompatibilities for the finite human, like for example, for me as a finite human, it would be incompatible to be Rahim, to be a bestower of mercy, and to be Qabid, to be a withholder of good things, and to be Khafid, to be a reducer or a abaser or debaser, and to be a Mudhil, to be a dishonorer or a humiliator. For us as finite, limited humans, those qualities are incompatible. But it makes me stand in awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that for Him, these qualities are fully compatible. And it's difficult for me to comprehend how, because I am so limited and so finite. But what I can take away from it is that what may be incompatible in me is not incompatible in His exalted magnificence. Another theory which I have heard is that the purpose of the divine names is a way to understand the divine nature. That if I sort of get all of these different facets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then perhaps we can gain an understanding. Once again, to be honest with you, I do not subscribe to this theory for very similar reasons as the previous. I do not believe that a finite being can understand infinity. So even though I have some small understanding of the concept of mercy, that does not mean that I understand infinite mercy. So for example, I can understand the concept of area. I can understand what 1 square meter is, or 1 square mile is, or what 1 acre is. But that does not mean at all that I can understand then infinite area. I can say the words. I can draw the little sideways 8, the sign of infinity. But that doesn't mean I have any genuine understanding. And I just wanted to share with you something about the paradoxes of infinity, which to me typifies the paradox of the finite trying to understand the infinite, and shows that even though we may say we understand or think we understand, even very simple mathematical paradoxes belie the notion that we really can genuinely understand. And this particular paradox is known as Hilbert's Hotel, and it is named after the famous American mathematician David Hilbert, who posed a set of problems at the turn of the 20th century that pretty much defined the course of mathematics for the coming century. But anyway, the paradox goes as follows. Imagine that there is this hotel called Hilbert's Hotel, which is a long row of rooms. In fact, it's an infinite row of rooms, and it is filled with guests. Each room is occupied by a guest. So I have an infinite number of rooms with an infinite number of guests, and all of the rooms are filled. All of a sudden, an infinitely long bus pulls up to the hotel with an infinite number of guests, and they want rooms. Can they be accommodated? Well, the idea is as follows. Hilbert tells each guest, move to the room that is double the number of the room that you are now in. So guest number 1 moves to room number 2. Guest number 2 moves to room number 4. Guest number 3 moves to room number 6, and so forth. Now, will we run out of rooms? No, because there are an infinite number of rooms. I can always go to another room. And what does this do? It opens up all of the odd numbered rooms. So now room number 1, room number 3, room number 5, and so forth have all been opened. And how many such rooms are there? Well, an infinite number, because there are an infinite number of odd numbers as well as an infinite number of even numbers. So now I can tell all of the infinite number of guests in the infinitely long bus to get out and begin taking all of the odd numbered rooms, and so I can accommodate a new infinite number of guests. And if this is puzzling to you or bizarre to you, that's just as it should be. The point here is that the finite cannot understand the infinite. So let's go to the third theory, which is the one I personally favor, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And that is that the divine names are ways to knock on the door of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without pretending to understand who is behind the door. What does that mean? It means they are ways of calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our prayers, in our dua. And so let us look at Surah Al-A'raf, verse 180. The Quran says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ولله الأسماء الحسنى فادعوه بها وذروا الذين يلحدون في أسمائه سيجزون ما كانوا يعملون. And to Allah belong the best of names, so invoke Him by them, and leave the company of those who practice deviation concerning His names. They will be recompensed for what they have been doing. And in Surah Al-Isra, verse 110, the Quran says, قُلِ ادْعُوا اللَّهَ أَوْ ادْعُوا الرَّحْمَنَ أَيًّمَّا تَدْعُوا فَلَهُ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى وَلَا تَجْهَرْ بِصَلَاتِكَ وَلَا تُخَافِتْ بِهَا وَابْتَغِ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ سَبِيلًا. Say, call upon Allah or call upon the Most Merciful. Whichever name you call, to Him belong the best names. And so it seems that the Quran is telling us that these Asma'ul Husna, these divine names or beautiful names or sublime names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, are for us to use to invoke Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to pray to Him, to beseech Him, to implore Him in our dua. So let's see what that might mean. So we all, of course, face challenges in our life. We have needs, we have difficulties, we have hopes for this world and for the hereafter. So let's say I feel in particular need of God's mercy. Then, of course, I could call upon Him in my dua as Ar-Rahman or Ar-Rahim. Ar-Rahman, the most or entirely merciful. Ar-Rahim, the bestower of mercy. And, of course, there is a great deal more to say about the difference between Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, but for now, they might be the names that we use to call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we are in need of His mercy. Let's say, for example, I feel I have been wronged, I have been treated unjustly, whether by my boss at work or by someone in the government or by a friend or a neighbor or a relative. And I am calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to witness this injustice and help me correct it. Then perhaps I would use some of the following names. Al-Muhaymin, which means the guardian, the witness, the overseer. Or Al-Aziz, the Almighty, because He is the one strong enough to obtain justice. Or Al-Jabbar, the compeller and the restorer, the one who can force the person who wronged me to redress that wrong and to give me my just due. Or I can call on Al-Hakam, the judge and the giver of justice. Or I can call on Al-Adl, the utterly just. And maybe those might be the names that I would use in that circumstance in my dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or let's say I'm particularly anxious or afraid, worried about something, and I need the peace of mind and the tranquility of soul that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can provide. So then maybe in my prayer, I will address him as As-Salam, the perfection and the giver of peace, or Al-Mu'min, the one who gives Iman and security, the one who gives both faith and the sense of security, who is the protector. Or I can call on Al-Hafiz, the preserver, the all-heedful and the all-protecting. So any of those names may be what I would choose to use in my dua in that circumstance. Or if I have committed a sin and I feel I am praying to him for forgiveness, then I could call upon Al-Ghaffar. Say, Ya Ghaffar, or Ya Ghafoor, the all and oft forgiving, the exceedingly forgiving, or At-Tawwab, the ever pardoning, the relenting, or Al-Afu, the pardoner. And inshallah, in a forthcoming lecture, we'll parse the differences between these names that all seem very synonymous. But for now, I think we see that these might be names that I would use in my dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so they are ways of knocking on God's door. Or let's say I'm being particularly tested in my wealth. I am now impoverished and I'm calling on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to provide for me and to help me in that circumstance. Then perhaps I would call on Al-Wahhab, the giver of gifts, or Ar-Razzaq, the provider of rizq, the provider of provisions, or Al-Karim, the most generous, the most esteemed, or Al-Muqit, the one who provides qut or sustenance, the sustainer, or Al-Mughni, the enricher, when I am feeling especially poor and I'm asking him, the one who holds all riches in his mighty palm, to help me and to enrich me. So I think we see then that these names may be ways of knocking on God's door, tailored to all of the different circumstances that we face, and for each circumstance we have a certain knock, hoping that that door will open to us with God's abundant mercy. So in the next lectures, inshallah, we will then begin to explore some of these names in more detail, hoping to enrich our spirituality. I hope, inshallah, that you will keep joining us, and thank you, and salamu alaikum, and God bless.